On today's show, the Cavs made a trade during the season for the first time in a couple of years. Are we sure that deal made them better? We're going to discuss the DeAndre Hunter deal on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find this show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I do want to talk about the DeAndre Hunter trade on today's edition of the podcast. When I was doing the mailbag episodes last week, somebody on Reddit threw this out there, and I thought, you know what, this is probably a question that deserves more than just the 5-minute runway that I would have to talk about it in a full mailbag episode. So I wanted to make it a bigger piece of an episode, and we're going to probably spend the first 2 segments of today's show talking about that. And then in this third segment, I do want to get into something Kenny Atkinson preaches a lot that I think we are seeing play out in the postseason. I just kind of want to bring that up too, because I do think he's right about this, and it's something that I want to touch on. But we are starting with the trade that the Cavs made this year. Now, on the day of the trade deadline, all the way back in February, very long time ago, the Cavs traded George Niang, Caris Levert, some second-round picks to the Atlanta Hawks for DeAndre Hunter. The deal at the time was seen as, by most people, a huge win. It wasn't like unanimously a big win. I think that there were some people that thought Atlanta was selling high on DeAndre Hunter. I think that there were a few different reasons for this trade for the Cavs. And ultimately, I think they got the best player in the deal. And anytime you do that, you have to feel pretty good about the trade. But let's take a look at where the Cavs were at when they made that trade, because at that time, the day of the trade deadline, which was February 6th, the night before, they beat the Detroit Pistons in Detroit. That was the game Darius Garland hit a buzzer beater from the Pistons logo at midcourt to win 118-115. Very wild win. And that was coming off of, that was the second night of a back-to-back after the Cavs had lost to the Boston Celtics 112-105. And that win against Detroit put the Cavs at 41-10 on the season. That was, at the time, I believe, the best record in basketball. I believe they had a better record than the Thunder at that point. Now, this trade that the Cavs made, I don't think was influenced by what happened 2 nights before. And 2 nights before was that game against the Boston Celtics. That was the game at home that they lost. Of course, they went 1-1 at home, 1-1 in Boston against the Celtics this year. They lost that game 112-105. And they lost it because they got off to a terrible start. They were outscored in the first quarter 28-15. And part of the conversation, if you remember after that game, part of the conversation was about the Cavs not having the wing depth to keep up with Boston. Because if you go back and look through that box score, Darius Garland played okay. Donovan Mitchell played okay. Max Strus was not great. Evan Mobley did not have a very good game. Caris Levert was bad. George Niang did not play particularly well. A lot of that was, okay, well, can the Cavs as constructed beat the Boston Celtics on a night where the Celtics didn't play great, but they still handled the Cavs? And I think that there was some thought that, the Cavs right now are a good regular season story. And hindsight is, of course, 2020. That wasn't entirely wrong because of what happened in the postseason. But I think the biggest question when you think about this trade is, did this trade impact the Cavs losing earlier in the postseason than anyone expected? And that is sort of the question that we need to wrestle with today. Because when the Cavs made the trade for DeAndre Hunter, when they sent away George Niang, when they sent away Caris Levert, there were a few things that stood out about that deal for me. One, it got them under the luxury tax. And I can confidently say from people that I have talked to that there was no mandate from ownership to get under the luxury tax. If the Cavs wanted to be a team in the luxury tax this year, they could have been. They were up until the trade deadline. They were over the tax. Now, I had heard from people across the league all year that, hey, the Cavs are going to probably going to find a way to cut money somewhere. That wasn't necessarily what this deal was all about, but I do think it was an added benefit. And I think that had things gone differently this postseason, like if we were still talking about Cavs actual basketball games right now, instead of doing revisionist history on a trade, we would be having a conversation later on this summer about, hey, the Cavs trading for DeAndre Hunter not only maybe made them better in the playoffs, but it also elongated the runway that this core has because they didn't have to pay the tax this year. So that is part of the benefit of this trade, is that instead of being a tax team, they were a non-tax team. And that matters as you go into the future. I don't know if it matters as far as like apron stuff goes, but when you get into the repeater tax and getting out of the second apron, it might not be as important to get out of the tax as it is to get out of the second apron in the future. That is something that is worth thinking about. One of the other things that this trade did that I thought at the time was important was I thought it made Kenny Atkinson's life as head coach easier. Now, George Niang, I thought, got a little bit of a bad rap in Cleveland. I thought he was a better basketball player than most of the fan base did. I thought that he was a glue guy in that locker room that was very important in that locker room. I know that for sure. And I think that he did things on the court that maybe didn't go, that maybe weren't always noticed, that maybe were not always viewed as important. Like I talked to somebody probably a month and a half after the trade, just like, we kind of miss George's ball movement a little bit. Like we miss the ability George had to, the ball would never get sticky with him. He was either going to shoot or he was going to pass. I mean, the drive game for him, not necessarily a big part of it, but I do think at times they missed that. But in that same breath, could George Niang have played for this Cavs team in the second round against the Indiana Pacers? Could he have been somebody that stayed on the floor for that series? I don't think that answer is yes. I think he probably would have struggled to keep up with the tempo at which Indiana played. And if this season had gone the way that everybody believed it was going to, with the Cavs and Celtics meeting in the conference finals, the question would have been, well, could George Niang have played in the conference finals against the Boston Celtics? He was not matchup proof at all. Not to say that everyone's matchup proof, because they're not, but I think that if you would have gone into that series with the roster as it was on February 5th, I don't think that everybody in that rotation would have been able to play in a series against the Boston Celtics. I don't think the roster, its final edition, everybody maybe would have been able to play against the Boston Celtics. I think there may have needed to have been some tough decisions by Kenny Atkinson and his staff had it gotten to that. There were tough decisions that needed to be made in the Indiana Pacers series. It got to that. I think it would have been a really tough decision to not play George Niang in those postseason series. I don't think he could have played against Boston. I don't think he could have played against Indiana. Now, Caris Levert is a different story. I actually think this deal was made with a few different teams in mind for the Cavs. I think this deal was made by looking in the mirror and asking the question, does this trade, again, Caris Levert and George Niang for DeAndre Hunter, does this trade make it our matchup against the Boston Celtics easier for us? And I think the answer to that is still yes. I think that the Cavs were better suited to play the Boston Celtics after the trade than before the trade. I think the New York Knicks were a part of that equation. I think the Oklahoma City Thunder were part of that equation. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves might have been part of that equation. The Los Angeles Lakers, any team that you look at that could have come out of the Western Conference, I think the Cavs thought about those teams. I think they thought about, does this make us beating Boston more likely? Does this make us beating New York if they were to upset Boston more likely? I'm not sure Indiana was part of that conversation. And that is where things maybe don't line up all the way. Because at that point, the Indiana Pacers were turning things around. They did not look the way they look right now. I think that's fair to say. They had gotten off to a 10-15 start, and they were playing much better basketball at that point. But it was kind of something looked at, they've been playing good basketball for about a month. And I think a lot of different teams in the NBA can go through a month period where they play good basketball. I think that is a fair place to be. I actually do want to look up what Indiana's record was at that point, because I don't think anybody saw them as a conference finalist back on this date. So back on February 5th, again, the day the Cavs beat the Detroit Pistons, the Pacers were 28-21. I don't think that was something that necessarily was considered. Now, things changed a ton from that. Obviously, the Pacers still finished in fourth. They were in fourth, but they were closer to the Miami Heat. They were 3 games above the Miami Heat than they were the New York Knicks at that point. I don't think that they were viewed as a contender, because you look at this, and did this trade make it easier for the Cavs to beat the Pacers? No. That is the one team that I don't know that this matchup helped a ton in. Not to say it necessarily hurt, but I do think that there are things that Caris Levert brought to the table for the Cavs that they very sorely missed against the Pacers. Now, that's not why they lost. I think the trade ultimately did make the Cavs a better basketball team and was the right move for the future, but I don't think it helped them enough against the Indiana Pacers. Let's talk about what they missed and what that didn't do next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by WayFair. The days are getting longer, the weather warming up. It is great, and people are spending more time outside. That means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or a small balcony, WayFair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. WayFair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation sets, love a good comfy conversation set, to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor. They've got it all. Prices, and this is important, prices that'll fit your budget. You can grab a new patio dining set, some string lights from WayFair that'll extend your outdoor space, because the weather is getting nicer. As long as you don't live in downtown Cleveland, it's beautiful right now because you don't have to deal with midges. And right now, it is disgusting. I cannot wait for this part of spring to be over, because I want to enjoy what, best kept secret, Cleveland weather in the summer, pretty good. You might not think that, but it is. Right now, it's not great, but WayFair can help you do that. Plus, they've got free delivery, and it's also hassle-free, even for the big stuff. You don't have to worry. It's going to get there. It's going to be great. So shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online this summer. Get outside with WayFair. Head to wayfair.com. That is WAYFAIR.com right now. Wayfair.com. WayFair, every style, every home. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed. The summer is rolling on. Greg Schwartz going to be on the show tomorrow, by the way. We're going to talk about 5 reasons why the Cavs lost to the Pacers. I thought this would be a bit of a good precursor to that episode. And then Spencer Davies is going to join me for a special 2-part episode Thursday and Friday later this week. And again, coming up later in today's show, I'm going to talk about something I think Kenny Atkinson, one of his talking points, pretty spot on about throughout the season. So I mentioned this trade not necessarily helping the Cavs against the Pacers. And maybe that's a little unfair, because DeAndre did get hurt in game 1. He dislocated his right thumb. He hit a couple of shots in, I think it was game 4, game 5. Game 5, I think he hit a couple of shots. Game 3, watching him play, even watching him go through warmups at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, he just did not look comfortable. There were a couple instances where I thought he struggled to grab the basketball. You could tell, okay, this guy dislocated his thumb a few days ago. So I think it is a little unfair to just say, hey, he didn't play well in that series, so it wasn't a good trade. Because this was also not a deal that was made with just a 1-year runway in mind. This was it's not a rental. He is under contract for a couple more seasons. This is a deal made with the future in mind. And that is primarily why I am still on the side of this was a good trade. I think the positives here outweigh the negatives of this trade. Now, that being said, they did miss Caris Levert against the Indiana Pacers. They missed what he brought the fact that he was obviously a little sporadic at times, like we all know the joke about Caris Levert spinning the wheel. Sometimes it's going to land on Michael Jordan. Sometimes it's going to land on Anthony Bennett. I don't know that that was entirely accurate, because I think that was accurate with his scoring and his shot making. But I do think the playmaking that he had was something that the Cavs didn't really have, because when part of the reason why I think the Cavs were comfortable making this trade and saying goodbye to Caris was the emergence of Ty Jerome. They felt as if they didn't necessarily need Caris's ball handling skills, because they had a third point guard essentially that was playing at a 6 man of the year level. And Ty was awesome until he wasn't in that series against the Pacers. And part of the thing that is so different about Ty's game to Caris's game was, I don't know that Ty was as good of a distributor as Caris was. So much of the conversation about Ty during this year, from Kenny Atkinson, from other people who had been with him in Golden State, it's like, he was more of a traditional point guard when he was in Golden State, when he was in OKC, back when he was in college at Virginia. Like, he was a guy that was very much a pass first guard. That is not true of what Ty Jerome was this year. He was not a pass first point guard. He was fine, but I don't know that he was as good of a distributor as what Caris was. And I think that Caris being able to play, and I talked about this on the episode one of the episodes I recorded with Spencer. We recorded those on Monday, by the way, so I'm talking here on Tuesday afternoon. That was recorded on Monday, so I know what I said. I know what's coming up. But Ty plays at a very, very unique speed, right? It's slower than anybody else on the Cavs. It is much different than most guys in the league. Caris played at a much quicker tempo. So I do think that playmaking that he brought was different and maybe harder to defend when you couldn't, or when you could focus on things for a week, like the way you could game plan. I think that is part of the reason why Ty wasn't as good in the series against the Pacers, is the Indiana Pacers had the opportunity to game plan against him, and they kind of could scout in a way that you can't on a Tuesday night in February. So I do think that's part of it, but the fact that he would have been somebody that could have served as a pressure reliever when Darius Garland's hurt, Donovan Mitchell is obviously dealing with something, Ty Jerome not playing very well, Evan Mobley is hurt. Now, you could not have predicted all of those things. And that is part of the reason why I think that we've gone, and I'm planning on talking about this with Greg on tomorrow's episode. That one has not yet been recorded. I'm planning on talking about that because I do think, and I've mentioned this a few times, I do think we've gone a little too far into the injuries didn't matter thing, where it was, injuries can't be an excuse, and the Cavs need to own this, and the Cavs do need to own this, and injuries are not an excuse for that, and they've said all the right things. But they do still matter, and I think that this conversation, this entire podcast today, would probably sound a little bit different if the Cavs were just healthy. Like, that is part of it too. And that is part of the reason why I think it's probably short-sighted to say, yeah, that trade was the wrong move. Like, I don't think that trade was made with the Indiana Pacers in mind. I think that trade was made with the Boston Celtics in mind. I think that trade was made with the New York Knicks in mind. I think it was made with the Oklahoma City Thunder in mind. DeAndre Hunter is somebody I think could probably defend Shai Gilgeous-Alexander pretty well. That trade was made with the future in mind. It wasn't just made with the 2025 postseason on Kobe Altman's brain. But I also think it was made with the Cavs are going to be healthy in mind. And had the Cavs known that Darius is going to be hurt, Donovan's going to be hurt, Evan's going to be hurt, I don't think that they don't make that trade still. But I do think that those particular injuries really, really pushed up the value of what Caris Levert brought to the table for the Cavs. And I just think overall, if they play anybody other than the Pacers, I think they can probably, other than the Boston Celtics, I guess, too, although they fell apart with injuries, if they would have played a team that plays a different style than the Indiana Pacers, I think this is a much different conversation than the one that we just had. So Kenny Atkinson had a talking point throughout the year. It was about winning the possession battle That's often something you hear in football, but we heard it a lot in basketball. And if you're watching the playoffs right now, I think you've noticed that matters quite a bit. We're going to dive into that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen or watch today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show on YouTube. And if you're watching right now, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe, hit that notification bell. Sorry, the show is coming a little bit later in the day than we are used to, but I had some stuff going on Memorial Day. So I did not get to record Tuesday's episode on Monday the way that I normally do, but I can assure you that every episode the rest of the week will be in your feed very first thing in the morning. But Kenny Atkinson, throughout this season, had a number of different things that he would lean back on, that he would say that were just kind of like core principles for him. And when things would go wrong, there are things that he would often point to. And one of those was the possession battle. And that is something that matters, obviously, very important, but not something that you often think of in basketball. You think of like the possession battles. Oh, that's football. Like a team won the possession battle. They won the turnover battle, stuff like that. We don't necessarily think about that a lot of the time in basketball. But what really stood out to me, and this was, I think, the biggest deal I've seen it on Monday night in the game between the Thunder and the Wolves. So Oklahoma City won that game 128-126. Now, the Minnesota Timberwolves will certainly feel as if they let a game slip away. And they should feel as if they let a game slip away. They scored 126 points against one of the best defenses in basketball. They shot 51% from the floor. They shot 44%, 18 of 41, 44% on a pretty good volume of three-pointers. 22 of 28. They got to the free throw line. Shot 78% from the line. Did that well. They out-rebounded the Thunder 41-36. But you know what they lost? They lost the possession battle. And that's why they lost that game. Because if you look at it, yeah, the Thunder's like, I can say that the Wolves outshot the Thunder from the floor, from three, from the free throw line. Like, all those things are true. It's not as if they did it by a wide margin. The Thunder shot 50% from the floor, 50.5% from the floor. They shot 43% from three on 37 attempts. Like, that was still really good. They too got to the line 20 plus times. But the biggest difference in the stat sheet was offensive rebounding a little bit. Like, the Thunder had 19 offensive rebounds and the Wolves also had 19 offensive rebounds. So I don't want to say that that is a wash, because it's not. But it does matter. The big difference was the Thunder turned the ball over 14 times. One of them was the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander pass out of bounds with less than a second left. That counts as a turnover. So for all intents and purposes, they had 13 turnovers. The Minnesota Timberwolves turned the ball over 21 times. Now, it's not as if, they just got crushed on points off turnovers, because that's not true. This was not a points off turnovers thing. It was more so the Wolves didn't get the opportunity to shoot the basketball as many times as the Thunder did. They lost the possession battle. They lost this game ultimately, not because they played poorly. They lost this game because the Thunder took 95 shots from the floor and the Wolves took 84. Now, the Wolves took 7 more free throws, so that's part of it. Like, if you want to say, okay, well, that would be 3 or 4 more field goal attempts. Okay, well, it's still 95 to 87 or 88, and that's before you're adding in, the field goal or the free throws that the Thunder would be taking too. So it would be 95 to 80, 86, 87 in terms of field goal attempts. The Thunder won that game and are ultimately going to be the team that goes to the finals because they've won the possession battle. It matters. And Kenny Atkinson sat up there all year and talked about this specific thing. That's why offensive rebounding was important to him. It's why forcing turnovers was important to him. If you look at the box score from that game, Julius Randle, who was largely ineffective at 5 points in 28 minutes on 1 of 7 shooting, he had 5 turnovers. Anthony Edwards, who played 41 minutes, was not great in this game. He had 5 turnovers. Everyone in the starting lineup for Minnesota, including Mike Conley, who only played 19 minutes, had at least 1 turnover. The Minnesota Timberwolves could not protect the basketball. And that's why they lost this game. That is ultimately why the Thunder are going to be going to the NBA Finals. So we can talk all we want about all these other things, defense, rebounding, like all of it matters. But taking care of the basketball, I think probably gets glossed over a little bit as something that matters more than we think it does. And I think that this game proves Kenny Atkinson right, that is something that should be a pretty frequent talking point, should be something that he cares about, and should be something the Cavs want to build their identity around. Because you don't have to always outplay your opponent in every facet of the game. The Wolves, I thought, outplayed the Thunder in a lot of areas on Monday night. But the one area they didn't was the possession battle. And that's why ultimately they're going to be going home in either 5, 6, or 7 games because they're not winning the next 3 against OKC. But thank you for making Locked on Cavs your first, maybe second listen today. Again, coming out a little bit later, not used to doing an afternoon episode, but here we are. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked on Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked on Cavs content. I'll be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.